This is the story of Bishop Eamonn Casey. It starts with a look at his life and career before diving into how he failed as a priest, a bishop, a father, and as a person. At first glance, Casey looked like a typical Irish Roman Catholic Church leader, but he had more modern, liberal views than most. He was born in 1927 in a small village called Flawed in County Kerry. He was the sixth child in a family of 10. He went to school in Limerick, then trained to become a priest at St. Patrick's College in County Kildare. He was ordained as a Catholic priest for the Diocese of Limerick in 1951. In 1969, he became the Bishop of Kerry and held that position until 1976. After that, he was moved to Galway and continued as bishop there until May 5, 1992. Casey was friends with another well-known Irish priest, Father Michael Cleary, who would later become part of his story. Casey was influential, outgoing, and liked to share his opinions on both church and political matters. He spoke out against poverty in Ireland and even refused to meet U.S. President Ronald Reagan because of Reagan's policies in Central America. He was charming, a strong speaker, and loved the spotlight. But behind the charm, Casey had expensive tastes: fine wines, luxury foods, travel, and fast cars that he drove recklessly around his diocese. He was such a notorious speeder that people wrote folk songs about how dangerous his driving was for local sheepdogs. Over 30 years ago, an American woman named Annie Murphy would change the course of his life and the Catholic Church's image in Ireland forever. In 1973, Annie was 25, going through a divorce and recovering from a miscarriage when she decided to start over in Ireland. She flew in from Connecticut and was picked up at Shannon Airport by Casey, who was then 46 years old and her distant cousin. Annie stayed at Casey's holiday home in County Kerry, a summer retreat for Irish bishops. There, a romance began between them. Annie later wrote a book about their affair. She said she fell for him almost instantly, even though he was 21 years older. Casey felt the same. Their first kiss happened the very first night. Annie remembered thinking that Casey was experienced, writing, "No one could kiss like that without practice." She worried that his devotion to the church would end things, but Casey promised her he'd confess and keep their relationship going, saying, "If God were here, he would approve of what I am doing." Casey cared deeply about his public image, so he told Annie they had to keep their relationship secret. Annie wanted to shout their love from the rooftops, but she couldn't. Things changed when Annie became pregnant. Casey wanted her to give the baby up for adoption, but Annie refused. 18 months later, the affair ended, and she moved back to the US with her baby boy Peter. For the next 17 years, Casey secretly sent Annie money. He paid her $175 a month, later raising it to $300. And in 1990, he arranged a $115,000 payment for Peter's education. The money came from church funds. Annie's life was rocky. She had 2 serious relationships and once tried to take her own life. But the secret stayed hidden for 18 years, until Peter wanted his father to publicly admit he was his son. Negotiations over paternity and money broke down. Encouraged by her son and partner, Annie leaked the story to the Irish Times. The paper discovered proof of the large payout from church funds. When confronted, Casey, who was in Malta at the time, fled to Rome and resigned as bishop directly to the Pope. On May 6, 1992, his resignation became public. Casey admitted to the affair, acknowledged Peter as his son, and said the misused church money had been repaid by unnamed donors. He was given the title Bishop Emeritus, meaning a retired bishop who still held his title. After resigning, he moved to the US and then to Ecuador, where he stayed for 6 years, later serving as a pastor in England. In 2024, Annie reflected on what happened. She admitted she pushed hard to make Casey recognize their son. "Sometimes I felt I'd play any card. I had to do it and I didn't care. I was a little bitter, maybe ruthless, maybe ambitious, maybe all of those things," she said. When the story first broke, Ireland was a different place. The country had strict laws, no contraception, no abortion, and the Catholic Church controlled nearly everything. People were stunned by Casey's hypocrisy. He had preached for fathers to take responsibility for their children while secretly denying his own. Annie later wrote her book, The Forbidden Fruit, and traveled to Ireland in 1993 to promote it. When she landed, groups of Irish women greeted her warmly, thanking her for challenging the church. But not everyone welcomed her. Many shouted insults, and she faced a storm of criticism. The worst moment came when she appeared on The Late Late Show, Ireland's biggest talk show, hosted by Gay Byrne. He introduced her as the most talked about woman in Ireland, but the interview turned into a public attack on her character. Byrne called her flirtatious, questioned the amount of sex in her book, and suggested she was more experienced than the bishop who had taken vows of chastity. At the end, he told her, "If your son is half as good a man as his father, he won't be doing too badly."
Thank you for telling us of your
I just
life.
want to say one thing.
Sorry, folks.
I think that, everybody's going to have an opinion. And Eamon is a great man with some defects, as we all are. Like Mike Train said, every man has a dark side to him in the moon. But don't forget, Eamon harangued me and bothered me to the point where I could never have another child again. And he did say to me, those adoption papers were there. And I'm not saying to end that on a bad note. I actually felt bad for him. I felt sad for him that he would feel that necessary to be actually kind of almost that afraid. And I'm not saying that he was cruel.
He would say he was doing that, Annie, because he didn't have faith in your capacity to look after the child. That's what he would say.
And he shot back, "I'm not so bad either, Mr. Byrne," and walked off stage without shaking his hand. The scandal badly damaged trust in the Catholic Church. Former Irish President Mary McAleese said it marked the beginning of the end of people blindly trusting the church. Years later, artist Paul McCormack decided to paint Annie as part of a project about people who had been vilified but reclaimed their own stories. He found Annie living in a trailer park in Riverside, California. Not poor, but not wealthy either. He photographed her, painted her portrait, and entered it into Ireland's prestigious Zurich Portrait Prize. It became a finalist and was displayed at the National Gallery of Ireland, right next to a portrait of singer Sinead O'Connor. Annie said she was flattered, seeing it as a small honor from a country that had treated her cruelly. She left California after her husband died in 2022, moving to New York to live with her sister. Her son Peter helped her settle there. Before Bishop Casey died in 2017, he, Annie, and Peter reconciled. But that was only the start of his scandals. In July 2024, a documentary called Bishop Casey's Buried Secrets revealed darker truths. The first allegations of child abuse against Casey had been made back in 2001, then again in 2005, and again in 2014. In 2001, a woman named Ellen Murphy accused Casey of abusing her in the 1950s when she was just 15. She said the abuse happened at a children's institution where Casey was chaplain. She sued him and the church but never went public because the settlement she accepted legally silenced her. Many victims who went to the redress board, set up to compensate abuse survivors, were paid off under similar agreements, which kept the names of priests and institutions out of the spotlight. In 2005, Casey's niece, Mary Donovan, accused him of sexually abusing her from the age of 5 to 15. Police interviewed Casey for 6 hours. He denied everything and called her mentally unstable. No charges were filed, but more allegations surfaced. 5 people in total accused him. Despite this, Casey continued working in ministry for years. The church only officially removed him in 2007. Even then, Casey fought the restrictions. He wore his priest robes, performed ceremonies, and even presided over a family funeral, shocking his niece, the very person who had accused him. The Vatican struggled with how to handle accused bishops because they answered directly to the Pope. Unlike priests, they retired Casey, hoping he'd fade into obscurity. But he didn't. He remained a problem for them until his death. Casey died in 2017 at the age of 87. Because the allegations and church actions were kept secret, many people attending his funeral had no idea about the abuse claims. 11 bishops, 61 priests, and 1,600 others attended his funeral. He was buried with full honors in Galway Cathedral's crypt, still holding the titles priest and bishop. Since the documentary aired, a petition has demanded his body be removed from the cathedral crypt. The Vatican won't say if his remains should stay or go. As former President Mary McAleese said, "At the end of the day, what does this burial represent? It represents an honor. And that is an honor he does not deserve."
They hate you. You're gonna die. I don't want to do this.